You know what
Backpacking America
is, right?
It's fucking awesome.
It's Backpacking America, an analytical podcast. You already know Wise Guys Sammy's has the best sandwich in downtown Oneonta, but now they've also been voted Reader's Choice for best burger in all of Oneonta. Wise Guys Sammy's is downtown's destination for great sandwiches, burgers, homemade soups, pizza, and more. See what everyone is talking about and try one of their award-winning burgers or one of their famous specialty sandwiches, all on homemade bread. Don't forget the best selection of craft beer in town at the Dark Side at Wise Guys. Make sure to like Wise Guys on Facebook for daily specials and more. Eat in or take out, and make sure to call 607-267-4347 or stop in at 261 Main Street today. Wise Guys Sammy's, Oneonta's best burger and downtown's best sandwich. All right, so for this episode segment of Have You Heard This? This is a United States Army veteran having his mic cut when he's giving a lesson about the true origins of Memorial Day, resulting from freed black slaves and African-American children gathering to commemorate the fallen dead soldiers of the Union side of the war. Check it out. This is very disappointing.
Memorial Day was first commemorated by an organized group of black freed slaves less than a month after the Confederacy surrendered. Recent years, the origins of how and where Decoration Day began has sparked lively debate amongst historians. However, Yale historian David Blight, asserting the holiday is rooted in a moving ceremony, was conducted by freed slaves on May 1st, 1865, at the tattered remains of a Confederate prisoner of war camp. It was a Charleston, Washington racecourse and jockey club, today known as Hampton Park. The ceremony is believed to have included a parade of as many as 10,000 people, including 3,000 African-American school children singing the Union marching song, John Brown's Body. They were carrying armfuls of flowers and went to decorate the graves. Interesting that there would be a tie back to Hudson with that song from John Brown. Most importantly, whether Charleston's Decoration Day was the first is attended by Charleston's black community. Hey Jay, Mike. We'll continue on. This is why you moved in closer so you can hear this.
So, Charles, you currently have 2 books out already on your website with charliersheldon2.com, and a third on the way on October 29th, 2021, called Totem. These books seem to be based off of your very real life of adventure and unbelievable tales. I'm very curious about this book, Adrift, and the real-life experience you have in seafaring adventures that we went back and forth a little bit about in our initial emails. So at what point did you decide to write about your seafaring days?
Let me first, thanks for having me. First, it's charliesheldon2.com is the, not Charlie R. Sheldon. charliesheldon2.com is my little blog where you can link to the books and so on. I just thought I'd tell you that. That's a hard question to answer. I've always wanted to write stories and been writing most of my life, and off and on, because you have to earn a living. So I spent a lot of time doing that, and always enjoyed hanging out around the water and playing around boats. And I got really serious about it and spent some time, number of years at sea working, either as a fisherman or later in my life as a merchant sailor. And I like good sea stories. And I was hoping I could write one. I guess is a fair way of putting it.
So what's this book about?
Well, this is the second book in a series of books, of 3 books. And they can be read alone. They're standalone books, but they're all part of one grand story, I guess you could say. and this is the second of the three books. The first book, which is called Strongheart, really is set in the Olympic National Park with some seafaring in the Gulf of Alaska, and that's the first story. And then the second story is Adrift. And when I first wrote Strongheart, I had a frame for the story where I had a number of people crashing ashore in a lifeboat on a remote wilderness off Canada and having to survive there until they could be rescued. And they asked one guy to tell a story to get their minds off their misery. And so he told this story. And then later on, I ended up just publishing the story without the frame about the guys in the lifeboat. But I had all these chapters about them. So I thought, well, how did those lifeboats get ashore, and what happened to the ship, and what happened afterwards? So that's what Adrift is, a story set 4 months after the first story, because one of the main characters in the first story, this man William, is a merchant sailor. He works on ships for a living on a run between Seattle and Kamchatka and Russia and back. And that ship catches fire in the Gulf of Alaska in December, and a ship fire is your worst nightmare, let me tell you. And they catch fire in a bad storm, and they have to abandon ship. And then the rest of the story is about how they salvage the ship and the lifeboats that disappear, and the family members back on the Olympic Peninsula who come up with a desperate plan to try to help rescue some of the missing sailors.
Oh wow. Is that based off of like a real story you encountered? Like, have you encountered a fire like that?
I've actually been on a fishing boat where they had a fire in the engine room, but it wasn't too bad. I've never, thank God, been on a ship with a major fire. And like I say, it's probably every sailor's worst nightmare, because there's so many flammable fluids on a ship. You've got the fuel, you've got the oils. So it's a nightmare. And so the story I wrote, I mean, as a writer, you write about what you think you know about and what your experience has shown you, or you can do research and write about that. And sometimes people can write very effectively based on research alone. I'm not saying that can't happen. But in this case, in this story, I wrote about something that I thought I could imagine. I certainly spent my time messing around with lifeboats and lifeboat drills and that sort of thing, and on big ships. And so, you know, the one thing I'd never done is work on a tugboat, on a big tug, you know, a salvage tug. And so I didn't really know how one would hook up a drifting ship to a tugboat if all the machinery on the ship was dead because the engine was dead. And so I had to reach out to some people who actually ran tugs, and they told me how to do it. So I got information from the guys who did it. I said, well, how would you do it? You know, if you've got a drifting ship and there's no way to get aboard the ship and no way to feed the lines on the tug, what do you do? And these guys told me what to do. So that's what I wrote about. That's how I wrote it.
Huh.
So I think it's realistic. I mean, who knows?
I mean, it sounds realistic. I wouldn't have even thought to ask someone about that. I probably would have put in a writing block, like, and then they just connected the ship or something.
Well, actually, the way they connected the ship and then what happens is a really key part of the story. But the method that was suggested, honestly, I set up a LinkedIn account, and I had all these guys in my LinkedIn who were sailors and captains of tugboats and stuff. And so I just sent out a general call saying, look, I've got the situation. How do I realistically describe how you fasten a towing line to a ship if you don't have any way to feed, you know, lines off the ship onto the tug? How would you do it from the tug, get it on the ship and back to the tug? And they explained how to do it. So that's what I wrote.
That's really cool. Yeah, that's awesome.
It was cool.
What do you have like any I don't want to say daring moments. I have to find a word for it. But when you were, you know, on this fishing boat, and you've been doing this for a while, as well as like backpacking the Pacific Northwest, which I find really cool. I also like those pictures you sent.
Yeah.
What was your most memorable journey on that fishing boat?
Well, there were a lot of them. I mean, it's an experience. I'd say if what you're asking is what was the most dangerous, I mean, if that's what you're wondering about, I mean, there's a few
Whatever
of
you
those.
want to
I
tell.
mean, I never sank. We never sank. We never had a bad fire. We had a few. We never collided with anybody. At least the boats I was on. But one time I was in this boat and we got caught out in a really bad storm. And there was the weather missed it. They missed the weather forecast missed it, and it was a clear nor'wester, what they call a clear nor'wester on the east coast of the U.S. And it just started blowing like 90 miles an hour, and we were 150 miles out, and for 3 days we were just at the mercy of this storm. That was pretty sketchy. That
So,
was pretty
do you get to
pretty
like
sketchy.
sleep? Do you get to sleep at all during that?
Well, you don't sleep much. I mean, you what we did was because you can't do anything. All you can do is drift at some point, and you either try to throw a sea anchor out or you don't, and we didn't. And we just blew before the wind, and you just have someone on watch the whole time, making sure the life raft on the roof hasn't blown away, and making sure the hatches are all secure, and making sure that the engine's still running under idle, so you have pumps and power and stuff. And the thing is, when you get caught in that kind of weather, what happens? You get these big seas, and they start breaking. And if you happen to be in the exact path of a great big breaking sea, there's not much you can do. It's just going to hammer you. So there's a certain element of luck involved, and it doesn't happen that often. But I mean, at the time this all happened, at least I was always so busy just trying to think about checking the engine room, checking the bilges, making sure the ropes holding the dory on were, just doing all that stuff. So I don't remember a whole lot of time to reflect and think about, we're not going to get out of this, right? But I mean, you could have gone there. It was definitely one of those situations that was sketchy.
God,
I'd
yeah.
say. But we got back. We got back.
Ooh, I
And
would.
then I was. I saw. I think I saw some weather that was even worse when I was on the big ship coming across the Flemish Cap in January. But that was a 900-foot long ship, so you just don't have the same. It's just not the same as on a 65-foot
Oh my
fishing boat.
God, yeah. Things like the tank of the
It's
ocean.
still pretty hairy. It's still pretty hairy, but So yeah, I mean, um, another time I was with this guy. He was a character, and he had this brand new boat, great sea boat, 54 feet deep draft boat, really good boat. And it was his first trip, and we're heading out. He drops down into the engine room to check the engine, and he comes out of the hatch screaming, "We're sinking!" And I looked into the engine room, and there's water waist deep in the engine room
Oh shit.
because some little hose had corroded away, and like a half-inch stream of water, and had just quietly been filling the engine room up. Fortunately, he saw this before water got sucked into the engine air intake and destroyed the engine, so we were able to fix it and get pumped out and go on. But I have to tell you, that moment when he rose from the hatch saying "we're sinking" was definitely got your adrenaline going. I guess
That's terrifying.
is. So, yeah, yeah. I
That's
mean, but
terrifying.
mostly most of that work is like it's just hard work, right? It's hard work. You're working 20 hours a day, and either you're working, eating, or sleeping. That's all you do. And that's pretty true in the big ships too. You don't have a lot of time off. You're either sleeping or working or on watch or on overtime doing deck work. And so, there's not much time to do anything else. I'd hope to start writing these stories when I was shipped out again, when I retired from port work, but there wasn't time. You're just
Mm.
working so hard, you just don't have time.
Have you ever
So
heard of the it was during, I think, the 6 Day War, where all the trading on the Suez stopped, and there was this international collection of merchant ships just stuck in the Suez for months. And
yeah,
yeah, yeah, and I was reading about that, and it was really cool because they would build kind of like bridges to other ships, and they would all. It was just it ended up just being like this drinking palooza, and they created like this ration system and everything. It was very interesting.
Well, that could be. I mean, I've been through the Suez Canal a bunch of times, and I know that ship that blocked the Suez Canal a few weeks ago or months ago, and I remember that place. I know exactly where they went aground. But yeah, you wouldn't believe the number of ships that go through that canal, and you go in convoys. You don't just drive into the canal, and you can only go one way. So they have convoys, and first it's northbound, then it's southbound, and you line up with 15 or 20 other ships, and you motor through the canal. Midway down the canal, there's a great big open water thing called Bitter Lake, which is where ships can anchor and pause. But it's very busy. I mean, it's really, so if you stop the traffic for any length of time, the ships back up in a hurry.
Oh my
In a
God.
hurry.
Yeah.
But anyway, go ahead.
No, I wanted to know what it was like to be in the Suez Canal. Like, what was your first impression when you sailed through?
Uh, it's sandy. It's hot generally. Um, if you're steering the ship, you've got to really be careful because the canal's not very wide, and you're trying to stay right in the middle. As you go along, every ship gets an Egyptian pilot to guide the ship through the canal, and the pilots always hold out for cartons of cigarettes and baseball caps, and it's weird, it only takes about 8 or 9 hours to go through the canal, one end to the other. It's about 90 miles, I think, and it takes it's a lot of coordination. It's pretty interesting. There's no bridges across the canal anywhere. It's just a body of water. The water's brown. I just remember it as hot and you had to really pay attention to, when you were on watch, you had to really pay attention to steering the ship, you'd have a guy in the bow and bow watch, and you had the anchors all set up to drop if there was an emergency and you had to stop in a hurry. I mean, most of that stuff never happens, but you need to be ready for it, I guess you'd say. So
I see.
that was it. And the river of ships, though, that go into the canal and through the Mediterranean out Gibraltar Straits it's just astounding. It's just there's so many of them, dozens of them, carrying all this cargo. So that's what it is.
The fact world trade relies on such a narrow strip where anything can go wrong is really. I call it the duct tape
Yeah, that's
method.
true.
I call it-
That's true.
So what I liked your I was reading on your blog actually about how when you were a kid and you had your dad's gear from the army, and I thought that was really cool. I kind of had some affinity with that because my grandfather was a veteran in World War II, and I got some of
Right.
his hand-me-down stuff. And man, you guys really adventured. I like the part specifically, and where you said you would rummage through like the half-constructed buildings at University Amherst, which is funny because actually one of my professors is trying to get me to go there for grad school, and I'm like, I don't know, but
Oh,
yeah, it's just funny to see that. I'm like, oh wow, he was like a kid playing in the half-constructed campus that I'm thinking of going to. Like that's interesting.
what subject are you thinking of going to grad school in?
Well, I'm not sure I'm really gonna go yet, but if I was to go, it would probably be labor studies.
Yeah, there's an industry that people are doing their best to destroy the labor market. That's interesting. That's a tough. Yeah, I was in labor unions, and if that's what you're referring to, labor studies, the study of organized labor.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm talking
No,
about.
that's great. Except that, of course, there's so few unions these days. It's just there's so much people trying to beat them back. Maybe they'll come back. I was in the Sailors Union of the Pacific when I sailed deep sea, and it was great. It was good to be in that union.
Did you
I
guys
like the union.
ever have a strike on sea?
No, you don't do it that. No, we didn't do that. I mean, striking is like a last resort.
Okay.
You have an agreement and you have a union rep and you try to make sure you meet the agreement and the agreement specifies all these terms and some people make a big deal out of it and others don't. And usually if you're on a ship with a decent captain, he'll respect the labor agreement. You don't have lots of beefs, as they call it, beefs, So yeah, I grew up in Amherst, and I remember when they built it wasn't very big when I moved there. I was a kid, because it was a long time ago. But yeah, they were that huge building program all through the 50s and 60s. And yeah, that was playground, going to these half-built buildings and explore. That was lots of fun. But anyway, so that was interesting. But back to Adrift for a minute. I mean, Adrift is, like I say, it's the second story in this series, and what I tried to do, and I'm trying to do, is celebrate both the Olympic National Park and that wilderness area, and also, of course, what it's like being out at sea. So I have all the books have some element of sea stories in them, as well as stories in the in the backcountry of the park. And people who know the Olympics can read the books, and they can get at a map and figure out where my characters are going if they want, and people tell me I'm pretty accurate with what I describe, but of course in most of the areas I'm talking about I've been to, so I can picture them and do it that way.
That's really cool. I think it would definitely appeal to someone in the Pacific Northwest. I'm definitely interested in checking that book out. Oh, there's a free preview too. Yeah, I might check that out. I do
There's
like.
preview. There's previews on the webpage for the first like 20 pages of the first two books. You can just read it.
Oh,
And
that's
then I
awesome.
made a point of changing the price for the ebook, the Kindle book, from $4.99 to 99 cents until October, so that hopefully more people will pick those books up and read them before the third book comes out, Totem, at the end of October.
Yeah, let's
And
talk about that.
and on the web page there's descriptions of all these books. Yeah, go ahead. What do you
Yeah,
want to know?
so is Totem? I saw too that you talk about the environment a lot, and you worked with Native tribes in the past. Does Totem talk about the environment and Native Americans and your experience with that?
Well, they're fiction. Okay, these books are fiction, so there's nothing. They're set in real places, of course, but they're fiction. I mean, I have a tribe in the book, but it's not. It's actually an invented tribe. It's not a real tribe.
Oh,
And part of that reason is these days, if you write about a real tribe, you get accused of cultural appropriation and a bunch of other things if you're not Native American yourself, which I understand. I mean, that's perfectly fair, but you can't write about the Pacific Northwest without writing about the first peoples who were here. So I invented a tribe that behaves, at least in terms of fish and environmental stuff, like all the other tribes do. They have a fish commission, and they try to regulate their salmon fishery, and they're very concerned about anything to do with habitat changes and development, right?
mm.
And but it's not a real tribe. It's a fictional tribe, because I from people who were in real tribes that was respectful to do that, right? So that's what I did. I mean, I worked with tribes a lot on fishing conflicts with ships, and so I hopefully learned something and got to know people, and it was a lot of fun. It was the most interesting part of my work, I would say. And there is an issue in these stories about a mining company called Buckhorn that has a permit to mine in the national park, because it turns out that if you have a valid mining permit at the time a national park is formed, that permit is grandfathered into use. And the Olympic National Park was formed in 1938. So I invented this mining permit way in the park for this mineral, erbium, and 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 because it was grandfathered, this company had could mine it, and I set this up. There's a lot in these stories between the battle between. There's environmental stuff in it, but I'm balanced. You know what I mean? I think I'm balanced, and so there's a company that wants to mine this rare mineral erbium deep in the park, because if you take erbium and mix it with other chemicals and then inject it into the burning process to make electricity with coal, you strip out all the carbon and detoxify the ash. So you basically, if they mine this erbium and make this stuff, it'll make the burning of coal clean, which of course a lot of environmentalists don't like, right? But nevertheless, so that was the premise. The premise was that here's something that could actually clean up the burning of coal, but the plan to mine the coal was not to go into vehicles and mine it, but was to actually use helicopters to bring the equipment in and then carry the ore out in bags. They didn't need much ore, just a little bit of ore. And so, of course, my characters don't like this idea, and they're kind of opposed to it. But I tried to set it up in a way that, most readers are going to favor the environmental side, I'm guessing. But there are going to be some people who think, well, wait a minute, if this cleans up coal and they're using helicopters, what's the problem? Which is a fair question. So, it's not totally one way or the other, but that thread runs through the stories that this company wants to mine in this valley where this guy's grandfather is buried, and so that's sort of the thread around during the story. But the other thread during the stories deals with this legend that all First Peoples have, that they've always been here. They haven't come over on the Bering Land Bridge. They've always been here. And I was curious about that. Is that true? Could that be true? How could it be true? And so I ended up doing these stories, and this ornery little girl who starts the story and fetches up on her grandfather's door, and he doesn't even know he has a granddaughter. So they take her with him into the park because they don't know what else to do with her, because he's going to see his grandfather's grave. And then the second day she sees and draws something that is an impossible animal, and they don't believe her, and she gets really pissed off. And then 2 days later she disappears, and that's when the story starts. so she sees this impossible animal, and she disappears and comes back with a story that's impossible but might be true. And anyway, so that's the start of it. And then that's sort of carried all the way through Adrift, which is really just a sea story about this ship and one of the characters becoming lost. But in that story, because I also follow the family members back on the peninsula who are worried about this man is missing, their lives are tied up with this company trying to get permits to mine this coal and dealing with, the tribe. And anyway, so there's a story on land too. And then the third book, which is Totem, is the following summer when they all go back in the park, and the company's about to start mining, and the people who are opposed to it are just trying to think of any reason they can to screw it up. And then there's a great big windstorm and everything changes, and there's this other huge adventure in the park, and then the story ends. so
that sounds cool.
Either people get, some people get into it, and most people like it, I think. And part of the reason I'm doing podcasts, things like this, are just to make people aware that the thing's out there, and they might look at it, and if they look at it and like it, great. If they don't, okay, at least they've seen it. Because today it's really hard just to even be noticed with so many books being produced.
Oh, absolutely. I feel the same way with podcasts. It's almost impossible.
Well, that's the other thing. I guess there's millions of podcasts too, so it's hard. It's just everyone's trying to get attention, and it's hard to get attention. But I wanted to, when I was writing about the park, of course, when you're writing about people who go into the park, and the story's set as they go in the park, they're backpacking, right? So it's really a story about backpacking. It's not about climbing. It's not about technical climbing, but it's about wandering in and off trail and camping, and what happens when things happen to you, right? Whether it's animals or forest fires or whatever else might happen. And I try to make it as realistic as possible. And if at the end of the story, the people read them and they think, oh, that was interesting, and then they think, could some of the things he's suggesting be true? Then I'm happy, Then I'm happy.
Well, it's also pertinent to today. With the drought out west, at the Hoover Dam, the environment needs to be talked about a lot more. And I feel like a book like this talks about two very important things that often are overlooked, which is, native rights and the environmental impact of the industry, of capitalist industry especially.
It does, but it also, and many people won't pay any attention to this, and I'll explain to you why I feel this way, but it also raises we do live in a technological, highly intensive type of civilization. And, You need a lot of energy to run that civilization. So if somebody comes up with a way to actually make the burning of coal clean, meaning you don't put carbon in the air and you're not polluting the air, why would anybody object to it? Now, some people would. I mean, there's people who think it's a disaster. I don't begrudge them that. I can understand that. But I've got to tell you, and this came from being on ships going from New York to Singapore and back through the Mediterranean, the Suez Canal, Pakistan, places like that. You go to some of these other countries and you realize really quickly that without natural gas and without fuel oil, they'd be, desert stricken. I'm sorry, that's just the way it is. That you need to have a lot of energy to do some of this stuff. So it's a dilemma, right? And that's what I'm trying to write about. I'm not saying it's do it one way or do it the other way, but I try to be. I don't like zealots. I don't zealots. People who are sure they have the right answer, and I don't care what you think. I believe this so strongly. That's another thing I write about a little bit, is that people mistake evidence, with strength of belief. If I believe it strongly enough, it's going to be true, and maybe it's true for you, but that doesn't necessarily make it true. You know what I mean? Whereas evidence, people usually used to agree that if you don't even agree on what the evidence is, you can't agree on anything. I guess that's another way of
There's a lot of
it.
I blame social media and just I feel like a lot of these problems come from just like everyone creating an echo chamber.
Right.
And
exactly.
not listening to each other. And, a lot of it, too, is our society selfish. And even Memorial Day, like, that's supposed to be a day of remembrance and trying to serve your country. And then it's used as a marketing scheme to buy a new pickup truck and get belligerently drunk. It's just...
Well, you're
Go ahead.
but I think it's a broader thing. It's even broader than that. Almost everything now, and maybe by necessity, I don't know, but everything has been, what's the word, monetized, so that everybody's trying to figure out a way to make a buck. And I don't begrudge people trying to make a buck, and maybe that's the way it is. But, I mean, even on the web, if you look at Facebook today, half of the posts on the newsfeed are sponsored or ads, half of them, maybe more than half of them. And so, that wasn't what it was set up for, but that's what it's become, basically. And the algorithms are set up so that if you start clicking on, like I've had click on book promotion things because I'm trying to learn something about how to, get the word out about my book, and I'm being inundated by everybody having the perfect answer only for $500.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so you reach a point, at least this is what happens to me, you reach a point where you just become kind of cynical and you just shut off and you don't want to deal with any of that stuff. And for me, I like to head to the woods. And part of what I was trying to write about was that sort of these basic values of, persistence and humility and hanging in there and being respectful of people and having a little faith and seeing a little wonder when you can are timeless and, have been with us forever. And maybe we ought to recapture some of that stuff. And maybe people, you don't write books to, well, I don't anyway. I don't write books to convince you to think one way or the other, right? I write books to tell a story, because part of the whole thesis of what I'm doing is that it's the telling of stories that made us human. That we, until we could remember things through stories and remember our culture and our ancestry and how to do things, we were just living, life to life without transferring anything. So stories, I think, is what made us develop as human beings. And I try to write stories the way people used to tell stories, I guess, is a way of putting it. And if maybe telling these stories about this ornery girl in this part of the country and a few sea stories leads people to think a little bit more, with a little more humility about what the other point of view is and maybe what might be a solution and maybe a way to get there from here without going to war, that's successful. But mostly, that's secondary. The main thing is that you, the reader, fall into the book and just like being in the story. That's what you want. That's what I want, anyway.
I think those are really good goals. Especially, I agree with the first point you made. I think our culture does need to change where we need to focus more on more what we have in common and what we could do to protect our environment. I feel like.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's so much. Well, here's an interesting thing. I mean, one of the things that people write about this in social media. Everybody gets into their own silo, right? And you're in whatever tribe you're in. You're either a liberal or you're a conservative. You're a progressive. You're a MAGA, Trump person, whatever. But you get into certain tribes, and then you only hear from other people in that tribe, and that's all you hear about, and that becomes your reality. It's not really the reality, but it's your reality, right? But these realities don't intermesh, and you have to intermesh to do anything. But of course, there's another element which nobody wants to talk about these days. But there's a lot of evidence that in ancient times, when one tribe or group of humans invaded another group because they wanted their animals or their land, which humans, by the way, have done since they were apes, right? They'd raid another community, and here's what they'd always do, and this is worldwide. They do this. They'd capture the women because they could make children with the women. They'd capture the children because they'd bring the children into the group and as one of them. Like like in American history, there were lots of whites who were captured by Indians and were raised as Indians, right? They're in the tribe and they loved it, right? They were made part of it. There was no, you're white, you're Indian. It was just, you're one of us. But then here's the other thing these groups or tribes did. They killed all the men because they didn't want those guys coming back after them. People are violent. Yes, this is another way of, I'm sorry to say it, but people are pretty violent or have been pretty violent throughout history. It'd be nice to say, well, we don't have to be violent anymore, but that's the way it's been. And I think you have to accept that tendency and then figure out a way to deal with it. You know what I mean? And I think for years and years, people did it with strong religion and strong churches, and maybe they're still doing it to some degree. I'm not sure that monetizing everything is a way to reduce violence among people.
No.
But I don't know what I'm talking about, and I'm old, so my opinion probably doesn't matter very much.
No, it does matter. It does matter. That's another thing too, is that people today, they don't value the past and what the lessons
Yep.
learned from older people, and it's just like there's this thing like it's a trend among my generation, like let's just destroy the United States. Let's break it up into different countries. If you do that, we're going to start warring with each other, and we'll be like Syria, and all the European powers will devastate us and take advantage of us for our land,
Well, I think you're right. If people stop, and maybe we're there now. I don't know. I hope not to. I mean, I know at least in the community I live in, which is Tacoma, Washington, is a very basic. It's a little city, right? And it's a very basic, pretty much blue collar city, and it's a very diverse city. You know what I mean? It's not all elite white people or elite, Indian Indian country people, or it's not. It's a mixed community, and it's a pretty humble community, and people don't get along. And there are racial problems here, and there are battles here, and there's homelessness here. But by and large, people work together, and everything works, right? But if people really start falling into whatever political camp they're in, none of that's going to work. I don't want you to pick up my garbage because you're a Republican and I'm a Democrat. Well, then what do you do with my garbage?
absolutely.
So I think it's yes. So I'm trying to. I guess I was just thinking today. So what's the point? You're trying to do these stories, or do you have a point beyond just entertaining people? And I'd say, well, I want to entertain people. I want people to get lost in these stories and think about whatever courage I show by the people in the story, which are mostly the women, by the way, and think about some of maybe they're a little provoked, but some of the ideas I'm offering, like maybe we don't know where modern people first arose, or maybe we don't really understand what really is happening with the changes in the climate. I mean, part of the thing is a plea just to understand that we really don't know as much as we think we do. Have a little humility, I guess, and if people did a little more of that, maybe they could then listen to people on the other side. I mean, I completely get it that there's a lot of people out there who are absolutely desperately trying to scrape ends meet from one day to the next. They don't have time for any of these higher concerns, right? They're just trying to get by. And no one, a lot of people aren't talking about them. You know, people don't worry much about them, which is too bad because they're the ones who need help, my opinion anyway. So
Everyone's focused on anything except the class dialectic. You know, I mean, there's poor people. That 1 in 4 American kids are dying. You know, and no one cares about that. Everyone cares about the social issue. And they don't realize that once you feed everyone, you could talk about the social issues.
I completely agree with you. And my wife and I often talk about this, that the forbidden subject in America is class. And yet that is absolutely the driving thing that separates us in some ways. And nobody wants to deal with that, because then when you start bringing people together by their class, whatever that means, then you're starting combining groups of people who right now traditionally are fighting with each other. And, you know, when they all get together and start going after the billionaires better run for cover.
Oh, yeah?
They're going to be coming for them.
That's why they created race. I think it was 1676. There was an uprising in Virginia, and it was of black and white farmers and indentured servants. And they uprose, and it got put down. And after that, Virginia was the first place where they implemented racial segregation and saying that black people cannot own guns. And then that's how racism was started to prevent the class unity. And it's
well, that could be. I don't know my history well enough. I suspect you're right. I suspect that, of course, that's the other problem I think today too, is that you know, there's so much history put out there that's really not accurate, but you wouldn't know it from what people say. So anyway, I agree with you, but I don't really get into those things in the stories I write. I try to stay. But you know, the biggest danger you can fall into as an author if you're writing fiction is using it as a way to, you know, promote your ideology or promote your point of view, because the reader will pick up on that and say, I don't like this. Is like reading a Sierra Club pamphlet. You know, I don't want anything to do with this. So I just want to read the story. And if you write the story right, and if you do it right, the reader will step away from the story feeling differently about certain things because of the story, not because of what they've been lectured about. I guess that's a way of trying to put that. But, you know, that's my hope anyway with the stories I do, is maybe have people a little more respectful of each other and understanding that, you know, life is difficult, and, you know, whether you got a hard time or I got a hard time, sometimes you got to pull together to make it work. I mean, part of the whole thing in the story Adrift is, you know, you've probably never been in a lifeboat, these damn enclosed lifeboats, but let me tell you, they're not something you want to be in. And it's not something you want to be dropped into the ocean with either. That's no fun, right? And they get stinky in a hurry, and they're difficult to handle, and then you're just a bunch of people trying to hang on and survive. It usually brings out both the best and worst in people. So,
right. I think our country's a lifeboat.
Well, it's feeling like that. So, but you're a backpacker, right?
Well, no, actually, so the podcast premise was to explore different towns and cities across America, and then COVID happened. So I got as far as Atlanta, and I stopped after that, and then I realized, people don't really like having a microphone shoved in their face. So what I did when the pandemic happened, I was like, okay, I'll use this as an excuse to just kind of bring people in from around the country. So you came. I don't actually know. How did you find my email? I'm very curious.
Okay, I'll explain that. I went. So I'm looking for podcasts, right? And
right.
there's a service or web page up there called Matchmaker FM.
Oh yeah.
Which lists. Well, but it lists several hundred or even thousand podcasts. Not all of them, just the ones who sign up for it, right? Now, I don't know if you did or not, because there's another guy who has a different service, and I can't remember what his name is right now, but he's somehow got a link where if you type in the name of any podcast, it gives you an email where you can reach that podcast. Because that Matchmaker FM, which I signed up for, there's a way to message through that to the podcast, and I've done that, but it's a clunky system. It doesn't work very well. You know what I mean? It's just not easy to use. And so what I would do is I'd find a podcast name from the Matchmaker FM, and I think you're on it, but I can't remember. And then I'd go over to this other guy's site and type in that name of that podcast, and it would give me an email address. But what that podcast thing, if I typed in the name of the podcast, I'd get a list of all the podcasts with that name and close ones, and I could get their emails too. I didn't do it very scientifically, but I've had pretty good response, and I've got different writing podcasts and camping outdoors podcasts, because my books are set in the outdoors and they're about adventure and survival. And I'm thinking people who listen to those podcasts might like to know about books about adventure and survival. That's the kind of theory.
That's cool. Okay.
And I think, and so that's how it came up. And I think then if you're listed in Matchmaker FM, then I switched over to the other guy's thing, and he's got put this together. It's like 150,000 podcasts that he has email addresses to contact him. And if I remember right, actually, if I click on the podcast for the name of the podcast, usually there's an email on that page, but that's tedious. It takes time. Whereas if I could just go to this guy's site, I get the email right then. That makes sense.
Cool. Yeah, no, I am actually on Matchmaker. When you said that though, I was like, oh, I didn't get a message from him. So that's pretty cool. I didn't know there was a site like that existed. But I'm mostly...
It exists, but I found it, like I said, I sent a bunch of messages through Matchmaker FM, but then I also sent messages to the emails and got many more responses from the emails. So I guess the Matchmaker FM connection sometimes doesn't work, but it's worked okay. So anyway, that's the effect of it, and but I'm still curious. You started going from city to city, but somehow backpacker got into your title, didn't it?
Yeah. So basically, here's what happened. I was a sophomore in college, so this is 3 years ago, and
right.
I was like, holy fuck, my my friends are all musicians and they have albums and LPs and they're playing shows, and I'm a communications major and I have nothing to show for anything that I've done outside of class. So I already did my college campus radio station, and I had a show then called Smash the Apparatus, and it was kind of okay. And I was like, I need to make a podcast. And I was like, really into the outdoors. Like, I lived in Oneonta, New York, and that's a very woodsy, small area.
Right,
and
right.
It's great. And I was like, I do want to backpack. I do want to travel. So I'm going to call it Backpacking America. Now, in hindsight, I was like, maybe I should have called it something else. But I already bought stickers. I already started marketing it. And I was like, if I change my name now, it's just not going to stick. So basically what I tell people is like, I quote unquote backpack, meaning like I just kind of travel or bring people into the podcast from around the country. And I talk to them very neutrally, and I look at things through a class-based lens, a Marxist lens, and that's how I guide the conversation. But I have people on that frequently aren't Marxists, or they may not completely agree with me. And that's the whole point, because I feel that there's so many different cultures, subcultures, and different types of people in the United States that that it needs to be celebrated, because people are like, oh, America is just this one clump of thing. It's this white racist settler, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, that's a part of it, sure. But there's also, glass blowers in Virginia and tobacco growers and there's boaters and there's people building
it used to be. I think it used to be. I noticed this when I was a kid. It used to be, of course, in this country, that when you had only newspapers, or the Pony Express, and you didn't have telephones or TV, different areas were very different with accents and behaviors and customs. But as the news became more national. I think the way of speech became more national. And now after, 70 years of national news on TV and 30 years of social media, right, all over the place, accents are less noticeable in many places. And you get the sense that there's not. I'm agreeing with you that the variety is all over the place. I mean, the Olympic Peninsula, where the Olympic National Park is a amazing mix of, a couple of, it's a tourist place, it's a logging place, right? So you got this tension between the logging interests, who tend to be, very right wing and conservative, and then the tourist industry, which tries to be as open as possible to everybody, right? And there's a few little colleges out there, and they're pretty liberal. And it's just a complete mixture of people. But the thing that's interesting is that the loggers and the tourists, that they don't ever admit it to each other, they both love that country for pretty much the same reason. It's just beautiful country with beautiful forests, and it's pretty interesting, right? Politically, they're totally different, but they both love it, maybe for different reasons. But nevertheless, they've got that in common. So they often would never admit it to each other, but it's true. And yeah. So the degree to which you can, I think that's a neat idea. If you can celebrate differences in a way that helps people see their commonality, you know what I mean? I mean, part of the premise of my stories is that this ancient legend, could people have always been here? And then I eventually got to the point of suggesting that not only did modern humans arise in North America rather than the rest of the world, which is completely against, scientific theory, but then modern humans, 60 or 80,000 years ago, went from here to populate the rest of the world with modern Americans, which is also scientifically outrageous to people, right? And my argument was that the Bering Land Bridge has been exposed many times in the last 2 million years, and who's to say people didn't come over here a lot earlier and then go back, right? And of course that would, I'd be accused of being a racist and of this and that, but I wanted to set something up where that ancient legend that Native Americans have, that they've always been here and therefore are the oldest among us rather than the most junior, and especially given our treatment of Native Americans over the last 400 years, which is nothing short of genocide. I kind of wanted to set it up so, they're the ones who are the original people,
Right.
not us. So,
I see
anyway.
what you're saying. That's cool. I mean, that's a good premise. And I agree with you on the genocide part. There's a lot of... I saw a court ruling, and I don't know if you could provide insight into this. I reached out to the Onondaga people, and I wanted to see if they could talk more in depth about it. But the Oklahoma, half of the state, including the city of Oklahoma City or whatever, is native land, ruled native land. Now, how do natives look at decolonization? Because I don't know if that means I would lose my American citizenship, if it would kind of be the same, but they would just not be treated badly by the federal government. Like, I don't know how that works in our country.
Well, I don't either. I've done a lot of study of American history and of Native American history. I think, there's, I don't know, there's like 400 or 500 treaties were written with tribes, and we've broken 400 of the 500. I mean, it's just a terrible, and it's just terrible. And yet, and this is the irony, and yet, bad as it is here, we've done more for the indigenous people than any other country on earth in terms of setting up reservations and providing health care, however bad that is. I went to Kamchatka, Russia in 1994 with members of 7 or 8 Pacific Northwest tribes to meet the indigenous Koryak people on Kamchatka Peninsula, because they were a salmon culture too. And we did it as a way to try to, so our people who worked for the port I worked for could get to know the indigenous people better. It was a great adventure. But the amazing thing was that the Native Americans who had truly been abused in this country were shocked at how completely deculturated the Koryaks were in Russia. And I think they woke up and said, well, as bad as it is where we are, at least we got a reservation. I mean, I'm not saying that that's good that they've got the reservation. It's better than not having one. Point being that, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and I'm sure lots of people thought they had good intentions. Some didn't, of course, but some had good intentions. But it's always in the execution, of how it can happen. So, I mean, but for the casinos and the use of casinos, I think many tribes would be really suffering right now. The casinos, in some ways, saved some tribes, and that's resented. At least here in Washington State, there's still a lot of resentment about Native American people. It's just huge prejudice against them because they have fishing rights here. They can take half the fish, and white people don't like that. But you know what? That's a treaty right. Full faith the U.S. government said you get half the fish, so we have to honor it, which is fine. Life is difficult, I guess is what I'm saying. It's difficult and complicated, and I guess the other thing I'd say is that if you look at history throughout the world, this pattern of invading other people and killing everybody off and conducting horrible abuse, it's the human condition. We've been this way forever. I hate to say it, but I think it's
move forward, and we have to move forward in a way that it makes you can't destroy the country to right the wrongs of the past because the trauma is still there. The destruction.
That's a really good point, and I don't think. Yeah, and I know people talk about reparations, they talk about all these things, and there's people out there who want to do all that, but that isn't going to happen. I don't think that's not going to happen, or there'll be a war before that happens. I know that. I know that there's a large part of Oklahoma that I think legally belongs to a tribe, and there's millions of white people living on it, right? And what do? You can't really do very much.
I think it's symbolic at that point. It's just
right.
like, what do? Do you send them? Where do you put them? And then here's the thing.
Well, you do the best you can. I mean, it's very interesting. These tribes out here, I think there's 26 recognized tribes in Washington State. It's quite a few, and they all have casinos, or most of them do, but they all handle their casino revenue very differently. Some tribes just whack the money up and give it to the members, a little bit like the Alaskan oil money is given to all the residents of Alaska, right? That's how that's gone on for years. But other tribes don't give any of their money away. They develop these funds and they rebuild people's housing, and they enable any kid to go to any college in the world if they get in free of charge, using the money from the casino. So they manage their money very differently. Different people are different. They behave differently. So it's hard to predict. I mean, I'm just agreeing with you that people are, I actually think that there's a lot of similarity among most people in this country still, except for, that 10% out on the fringe on each side. And maybe it's a bigger percentage now than it was 20 years ago, but it's still a fringe percentage. But they're the noisiest. Don't you think? I mean, they're the noisiest.
Oh yeah, and they get the most attention. I mean, look at the
most attention.
Look at the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. Those are the people that want to destroy the United States. It would fall apart in less than a week. The European imperialists would destroy these people. They don't understand that they would use. I mean, Canada literally said. Prime Minister Trudeau said, "If the American election does not go peacefully, we will intervene." That's fucking terrifying. So,
Trudeau?
Yeah. He tweeted that out.
Yeah, well, yeah, but, my reaction to that is, have at it, Trudeau. Canadians can't intervene here. They couldn't do shit here. Sorry.
Oh my!
And they got their own problems with their own First Peoples in Canada. I mean, give me a break.
I'd argue it's worse.
Anyway, it's
it's a lot. There's a lot of shit going on, but we shouldn't blow up the whole country because we can't figure it out. If anything, that's way worse. That's way worse. I agree. We need to focus more on I think we need to establish a socialist system here. I think we need to go do through elections. I used to be more on the gung-ho revolution side of things, but then it's like no one wants that shit. No one wants that shit.
No. Well, even the I mean, Bernie Sanders, I had a very interesting experience when when I left my last ship in 2016. I was in Violet, Louisiana, Actually, I drove to Violet, Louisiana to join this ship, and then we drove then I took the ship up to New York to the shipyard to be worked on. So I had to fly back to Violet and get in my car and drive back to Seattle. Long story. And this is 2016. And I'm driving through Minnesota and North Dakota and Wyoming, and I was surprised at how many of these, what otherwise you'd think would be, very conservative Republican ranchers, right, had Bernie stickers on their, they were, until Bernie left the scene, they liked Bernie. But then he got screwed. He left the scene. And Bernie, to his credit, I mean, I like Bernie, but his credit, he kept trying to explain the difference between socialism, the scare word, and democratic socialism. He never could explain that because we've had almost 100 years of being told if you say socialist, it means you're a monster. And the irony is that we're a pretty socialist country already. So anyway, I don't disagree with you. But I just try to write stories, and I've written these 3 stories in hopes people might want an escape or just want to learn a little bit about the Olympics and about what it's like at sea. And if they pick the books up and like them, that's great. I'm happy. And if they're a little provoked to think about things, that's even better. That's my goal.
That's the hope of anyone making content.
Yeah,
I feel you on that.
that's what I'm trying to do.
How much are these books, if someone wanted to go buy them?
Well, the Kindle books are now 99 cents each, the 2 that are out. The third one won't be published until the 29th of October. The paperback, the book version, which they're really nice books. The cover artist did a really nice job, and the books look really nice. Both Strongheart and Adrift are $18, and Totem, which is twice as long as those books, is $22.
That's not bad.
No, it's not bad. And I'm hoping I can get people to read the first 2 and then pre-order Totem. Totem is really 2 books in one, and so it's a good meaty book that you can really get into for hours and hours. I mean, you can look at this a lot of different ways. People complain if you bought all 3 books, it's $60 or something like that. It's a bunch of money, but it's how many hours of reading? It's anyway.
Priceless.
And people who want them cheap, they go for the ebook version, the Kindle version, and as I said, I've made them very cheap, just in hopes people pick them up and read them and get interested enough to maybe want to buy the third book, and we'll see. We'll
Absolutely.
See.
Well, I wish. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say that so it's the form of the book is called magic realism, and it's a pattern of writing that the South Americans developed, Isabel Allende and others. And really, what it is it's like the normal world, but there's 1 or 2 things that are different. The magic realism, right? And so these books all have a little magic realism in them, and they're not fantasies, they're not science fiction, they're as true as I could make them. And hopefully, the way I've done the magic realism will lead the reader to think, maybe that's true. Could that be true? That's what you want. You want the readers. Some readers will read these books and they'll just go right with the little bit of magic that's in them. And others just won't. People are different. Some people just don't go that way, but most do. And we all like a little bit of wonder in what we're doing in our stories, and that's what I'm trying to provide.
Well, I definitely wish you the best of luck, and I am definitely going to start reading your books because they sound great, and I really do.
Well, thank you, and I hope you do, and I hope anybody who's listening will think about looking them up the same. Again, it's charliesheldon2.com, or you could just look up Strongheart or Adrift under my name, Charlie Sheldon, and find them on Amazon. And you can also go to a bookstore and ask them for them there, and they'll order them for you if they aren't carrying them. So, which I prefer because that supports bookstores, which is a good thing. But
Always
thanks
nice.
very much for having me, and I appreciate it, and good luck with graduate school. You could do worse than UMass. That's where I went to graduate school. It's a good place.
So I've heard. I you know what? I think that's the only place I would want to go. I just gotta focus on repaying my Excelsior loans here, because New York State kind of gives you a ball and chain when you take out their loans.
Right. Well, that's the difference between when you were there and I'm there. We didn't have to deal with that. And tough. But well, good luck with your podcast. And now, will it be available at some point for me to download it or look at it?
Yeah, it should be available tonight. I usually publish on Mondays.
Oh, wow. Oh,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
well, I hope.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, thanks a lot for having me then, I guess I'd say.
Oh, okay. Shit. I'll send you the link, and it was really great having you two. I really enjoyed this conversation, and if you ever want to come back on, you're more than welcome. I mean, this was great.
Well, you may hear from me. You never know. And thanks a lot. And if you do read the books, let me know what you think of them, okay?
You got
I'd really appreciate that. All right. Thanks a lot.
See you, man.
Okay, thanks.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to Backpacking America. That was Charles Sheldon. And make sure to check out his books and his blog. Once again, that blog is www.charliesheldon2.com. And make sure to read the previews of his book. He gave us a really great discussion about what they were about. So until next time, episode 112 is going to be out on Friday. And yeah, just keep posted, because I might have to readjust the podcast schedule, because I am starting work and finding some interviews and stuff. So just keep posting on the socials. And until next time, my friends. If you want more Backpacking America content, make sure to follow the social links in the podcast description. New episodes starting and ending your work week come out every Friday and Monday. Thank you again for listening, and stay breezy.